less than a decade after the Nuremberg trials, where there was a complete code written out on what was ethical behavior in human experimentation as a result of the crimes that had been committed by the Nazis and Jesuits in Germany.
The whole idea that, yeah, we made all these rules and regulations about what you're not supposed to do, and then we hired those same people that we criticized in the paperwork and put the task over here. We basically said, hey, what you guys are doing over there is wrong over there. Come over here and give us a hand over here. It's okay if you do it over here. They're very limited on their perspective of what is possible. And if you're going to be limited on what's possible, you're going to have trouble dealing with the probabilities.
Yeah.
As you know, and many other people are aware, nowadays the technology exists, whether people want to debate about its use or not. The technology exists to insert a thought, a word, a statement, a sentence into somebody else's head.
Oh, it's existed since the 1970s.
I agree with you 100%. A lot of people would like to argue that. They can't argue it anymore. As of today, the technology is here. Now the people need to start discussing, well, what do we do with that? Because now the question begs of, if you have thoughts in your head, how would one divine out or discern which one are theirs or not? It's a very legitimate question. If the technology exists, which it now does. So I put it out to the community. How do you figure out if you have multiple thoughts in your head, which one are yours and which ones aren't? In my mind's eye, I think that targeted individuals, people that are currently SSP related, might be getting impacted. I shouldn't say might, are being impacted by these technologies. So
they're definitely being impacted by.
They're actively being impacted and I guess dealing with or tolerating, so to say, functioning. I'm trying to figure out a way to start to communicate to the folks that don't feel like they have any associations to anything. Because effectively, in reality, you and I know that's actually the target.
They are the target, and that is what 5G is aimed at, is rolling out the V2K on the masses who have never had to deal with any of this. They have no idea that it's even possible. And
they will lack the discernment to figure out what is an original thought or not.
They'll go along with whatever the voice in their head says, because if it's at the right tone, you think it's your own thought.
Correct.
And those of us who have been dealing with it for decades know how to block it.
And you get the amazing people that are like, well, if this was going on, they would tell us about it. Yeah, his name's Robert Duncan. He's telling us exactly what he did.
Yeah, and he's targeted now because he's talking about what he did.
Right,
and, And what blows my mind, okay, I have the utmost respect for this man speaking his truth. But he's still proud of the work he did.
You are very correct. That's a very astute criticism of the man, and I don't even think he would deny it. I imagine.
I don't think he would either.
Yeah, I don't think he would either. He would say, yes, I'm very proud of the dastardly thing that I did.
No, he's very proud of the cleverness of his work.
Yes, I guess that would be more appropriate.
He's aware that it's dastardly and would really like for it to be stopped, but he's still proud of the cleverness of his work. Whoever it was that convinced him that what he was doing was wrong had to have been brilliant.
Fair enough.
So that person deserves our thanks. But Dr. Duncan, I was friends with him on my profile that got permabanned. So, but we had several discussions, and he said, if you're targeted by my program, it means you're a nobody.
But he does put out a lot of good info. I do see his page, and he's a brilliant mind who unfortunately got led down a dark road, which happens. I mean, there's organizations that work diligently to find the appropriate talent for the appropriate programs.
And someone who is interested in AI interaction with human minds is exactly who they would have chosen. And somewhere along the line, someone convinced him what he was doing was wrong. And
Right.
that person, to me, should have more respect than Dr. Duncan himself, because he would have been a really tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
So I hope that person is safe and well.
Me too. I saw someone else in another group, and I don't know the person or their position, so I can't like give credit where credit is due. But they said something about, I guess, I don't know what the perp, I don't know the appropriate term. Someone was giving them a hard time and trying to belittle them because in the program, and the person said that they simply just responded with, listen, you know who I am and I don't know who you are. So it shows which one of us is important. It might have been you that had impressed upon me the angle of when you're trying to, I guess, like red pill people or help make them wake up a little bit, is to come from the angle of the technology that is real right now, because you can't argue that, you know.
Yeah,
so
that's provable.
yes, that's provable.
There are very few things that we can actually legitimately prove, but the technology that's coming out now, especially when it's the same technology I was talking about 4 years ago in 2016, and now it's coming out.
I then suggest the next question we should ask is, who has access to them? Next question simply being, do you think they would use it? Simply put, let's answer those questions, and then we'll continue the conversation as to what people think is going on in the world.
Yeah.
I believe that if they admit the technology exists, and if they admit who has access to it, then we can start having a more real conversation of what's going on around us.
That makes sense. I started with Jim Marrs.
I'm familiar with him.
Okay, and his books, his references about the Fourth Reich and Operation Paperclip. I had followed his research into the Kennedy assassination, and 2 weeks after his death, the CIA released files that proved he was correct. So
I would put out there that if you want to look at what I would call almost the conspiracy theorist's Bible, pick up Jim Marrs' book, Rule by Secrecy.
Yeah.
And to read it from cover to cover, and then when you get to the back, go right back to the beginning again, start all over, because it'll instantaneously read differently again. Once you have all of the information from that whole book, you can start all over again, and it's going to be a whole new book again.
And go through and check all his references.
Yes, he's a very well-referenced and well-researched man, and he's not full of beans, and that book has so much truth in it. I can't even tell you how many times I've read it at this point. Go anywhere in my town, bump into anyone, and they might, say, what's the craziest thing, or I might have a hat on. They say, oh, that hat's a South Pole hat. Are you going to go to Antarctica someday? And I say, oh, no, actually, I spent a year at the South Pole Station. And they might turn to me and say the exact, oh, you're so full of shit. You're a bullshit artist.
Yeah.
But that's the depth of experience and exposure and trust of strangers that we don't give credit to other people's stories. And we so rapidly discount or discredit it because it's so far from our own experience. We can't even begin to wrap our heads around it. And I can appreciate that if I had a South Pole hat on and I said that to somebody, they might turn around and think I'm totally full of shit.
We did not choose this to happen to us.
Right. It says right in the paperwork that people were worked on unknowingly.
Yeah.
All over the place. So even like with that being said, you are a reasonable person that if somebody sat in the chair next to you and put up a very reasonable presentation as to how none of your memories were what you thought they were, but in fact there was a science that existed that implanted every one of them. If the person could put up a reasonable debate, you'd be like, that sounds really reasonable. I'm going to have to consider that. It's not like you're a lunatic that's like, my story is my version.
I've had that. Shane Bales is known in the community. He's a whistleblower for what most of us would call the Rothschild Illuminati.
Okay.
He maintains that the SSP veterans were all experiencing virtual reality inside deep underground mines, deep underground military bases.
Okay.
That none of us ever went into space, that it was all implanted memories.
Okay, then I would welcome him to prove that just as much as anybody else. I mean, he could suggest that, but I would imagine that if he could put that out there, it would be a great conversation.
Either way, there's stuff that has to be stopped.
Yes, correct.
And there are suffering people who are left with traumatic memories, whether they were real or implanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, heaven forbid, maybe everybody with an SSP memory is just showing signs that there's a successful replant of a memory to cover some other nefarious story we've yet to figure out.
Well, I think we've given the folks a lot to think about.
I believe that is correct.